Thanks for that kind introduction. Thanks for the invitation. I've really been looking forward to this meeting for some time, and very honored to be here. I want to first thank our organizers, and I won't mention them by name because you can read them over here just as fast as I can. I can say them, but I really, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this, and look forward to not only speaking for about 45 minutes, but especially learning for the rest of the day, because there's a lot of great programming that I've seen going into this, and I've seen for a long time. Anytime you get a bunch of people that know and work with REDCap together, some kind of magic happens, and there's a lot of collaboration and good ideas. And so I love to take those back to the team. I was telling Andy Aronson a few moments ago that when I was asked to provide a title, I wasn't really in the mood to stop and think about it that day. So I thought, well, what would be so inclusive that I could talk about anything I wanted to when I finally get around to making these slides. So I chose what's old, what's new, what's next, and what matters. And so I actually kind of like the framework, and so I'll kind of go through that as we go along. I typically speak right up until the time I get yanked off of the stage, which I think is 10:20 here. I want to make sure 10:20. So I'll probably do that right in this session as well. But I did notice there's a break right after this session, and so if you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you. So what's old? REDCap is kind of old. So last year we celebrated 20 years of REDCap at Vanderbilt University. I had our lead developer, Rob Taylor, go back and look at the logs. We still use basically the same system that we started with one major REDCap installation at Vanderbilt, and then one set aside for Part 11 studies. But having go to the logs, and the first log he could find was August 2nd of 2004. So we threw a little party at Vanderbilt. We're still working kind of remote, so it wasn't a huge party at Vanderbilt, but it was for those that wanted to come in and participate. We did, and then we went to my house and had a party, had a luncheon with just mainly the programmers and the support team. So that's the team, and I'll show a better picture of them later. REDCap is really, as I think back and reflect back in 2004 when we created REDCap, it all started with these little blue sheets of paper. At Vanderbilt, at least in 2004, we were getting real serious as an institution about this new set of policies and guidelines coming out around this thing called HIPAA security rules. So and as a system administrator at the time, working with our clinical research center, I had to fill out some questionnaires on little blue pieces of paper that talked about how we were compliant with HIPAA security rules or weren't, for our systems. And I remember thinking distinctly, yeah, I don't know how this is going to play out for the research enterprise, but we're not even close. I work with really, really smart researchers all the time, and they are, they're using Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Access, FileMaker Pro, and those are the ones that are quite sophisticated. I love all those tools. I've used many of them, but when we started thinking about HIPAA security rules and audit logs and all of the things that we all just kind of take for granted now, realize those tools are probably not going to get us where we need to be. My hypothesis at the time, because I worked with a bunch of individual researchers, that they weren't not adhering to best practice because they wanted to be rogue for some reason, that they were not adhering to best practice because we weren't giving them an easy way to do that. So we sort of created this strategy around thinking about the fact that many diverse studies, we had thousands of studies at the time and still do at Vanderbilt. We had very few people that could actually build databases, if you will, and in those platforms that I mentioned or elsewise. And we realized we're not going to be able to hire ourselves out of this. And so if we're going to make it work, we're going to have to come up with some clever approach that ended up being REDCap, where we collect the metadata about a study. But when we have the metadata about a study, then we can build one software platform that sort of reads in that metadata about the study and morphs to meet the needs of that study. That was the initial sort of thinking and process behind coming up with REDCap. The next really tricky part, and I don't really talk about this much in the slides, so I'll just go ahead and say it. The next part was making it easy enough for researchers to do that metadata creation themselves. So you know a lot more about Alzheimer's disease than I do, or my programmer. Makes more sense for us to try to put this in your hands for a do-it-yourself type of build on project capture and management of data than it does for us to hire programmers to put in your case report forms and surveys, et cetera. So I think I just went through with this slide most of the reasons for this, but the first project went live in August, as I mentioned, 2004 at Vanderbilt, and it was real simple. It was get your data capture in, so build forms that look like case report forms for data coordinators. Do a little extra and make sure that, if we're doing coded variables on the back end, that you're seeing the pretty variables on the front end. Do basic validation. If it's supposed to be a number, make sure it's a number. Those sorts of things that, we all kind of take for granted right now. But as I was meeting with research teams in the very beginning and trying to sell them on this concept that you should quit doing it the way you're doing it and you should start doing it this way, this was really appealing to the research coordinators, of course. The other thing that it has was data logs. Again, it started around HIPAA security. When I was doing those initial sales pitches to researchers, the researchers didn't really care about this, but I was able to say, you really should. And I promise you're going to like me when you start talking to the IRB about your study, because we're going to be able to just say that, you're doing all of that by means of using REDCap. And then the other one was user management. So we wanted to build one system to serve them all, rather than many systems to serve the many. And so we needed to be really careful about who had access to which projects. This is a screenshot that actually isn't from 2004. It's a little more sophisticated than what we developed, but that was about it. So we decided we would give it away. I think just like you guys do, but we give it away. We support any student, any faculty member, any staff member, anything that you can wake up in the morning and think about as part of your Vanderbilt job. If you can do it, you can do it. We don't limit beyond that. And the reason we wanted to set it up that way is, I wanted to go to bed at night realizing that, thinking that, there is no reason that a researcher should be in an inadequate system for data capture and management, because we provide it at no cost. We think from an institutional standpoint that provides us some security. It protects the researcher, data quality and continuity. It protects the participants, of course. And we found that the first project in REDCap costs a lot of money to set up, but the next 100 really don't, as long as we're adhering by this do-it-yourself and self-service methodology. So by the end of the year, we had 20 projects that were up and running, and I have to tell you that I met individually with each of those teams, some of them multiple times. And some teams that never went forward with what would become REDCap. So in the beginning, there was a lot of sales pitch stuff, and just getting people to sort of trust that this is a better method than otherwise. 20 sounds pretty modest today. I would say between your institution and my institution at Vanderbilt, we've probably had 20 projects started in REDCap this morning. But if you're used to building these one at a time, this was incredible. In that same amount of time, I could have probably worked with 3 or 4, different research teams in sort of helping them customize for their project. So this was a big deal, at least at Vanderbilt. So at the end of the year, this was before the CTSA Awards, which is a big grant that supports institutions like yours and mine with infrastructure for providing homes for clinical and translational research. This was before that award. We had another award called the GCRC. And I remember going to a meeting and having a poster session at that GCRC meeting In that poster session, I sort of stood up and said, this is the problem we're trying to solve. Basically, the stuff I just told you. And I always sort of ended with, I still end with if you've got good ideas or if you want to collaborate, let me know. And that's why I wanted to tell you that right after this break, I'm available. But at this particular meeting, there was a guy named Nathaniel Gonzalez from Puerto Rico. And he saw this poster and he said, my boss, Jose Conde, sent me to this meeting. And he wants me to figure out what people on the mainland are doing, because we need to sort of shore up our research infrastructure at the University of Puerto Rico. I told the guy, I said, this is where you're going to know I'm a horrible businessman. I told the guy, this is going to take some lift from me. It'll slow me down. So you tell your boss, I want 5% of your effort for like 3 months if we're going to do this. His boss came back and said, I'll give you 30% of his effort for 6 months, just to see if we can make a go of it. The beautiful thing was he really gave me about 90% of the guy's effort, because it worked really well and the collaboration worked fantastic and the solution worked well there. He gave me 90% of his effort for several years. And even better, this guy, Jose Conde, was a biostatistician and I'm not. And so the first programming, we did some shared programming, in that first collaboration. And the first programming was around getting the data out. Because remember, I said I did a lot of those sales jobs to researchers. The number one question was, Paul, what happens if you get hit by a bus? And I knew what they meant. These were friends of mine, and I knew they didn't want me to get hit by a bus, but I didn't really think they were worried about that. I thought they were worried about, how do I get my data out? Or what if this is a big fail? How do I get my data out so I could sort of migrate to another piece? So this guy being a statistician, having some extra programming cycles, that was sort of the genesis for the data export tool, and being able to sort of export not just the data, but the metadata into biostats packages. So if you're using R or Stata or SAS or what have you, you can get the data out. So it was great. The very next year, Nathaniel and I both went to the same meeting. We're standing up there and we meet these guys, Rob Thielke. So Joe showed a picture a moment ago of 7,700 dots on a map. I promise I'm not going to go through all of those. This is the last one that I'll go through. But they also said, this is something that we could use at Medical College of Wisconsin. And so we said, well, we got a model for this. And so same deal. You guys do some programming support. We'll find something that is meaningful if we're going to continue this as a collaboration and a consortium even. And then we'll keep kind of doing the project management and main core oversight development at Vanderbilt. So these guys developed what would become user authentication that could be set up at any other institution. And again, for reasons I've already mentioned, that was going to be really important. So again, I'm not going to take you through each of those dots in the map, but I think when I think about what's old, I like to sort of talk about this story because it sort of gets at the volunteerism within the consortium itself, and I'll get there later. But we don't ask every new REDCap installation to donate % effort and that sort of thing. Eventually, that got to be too hard to manage. But we do still have sort of a policy that those that are contribute the most have the loudest voices in what we're going to do next. And it's still a very much a volunteer-driven community. So the two common goals, the first one, of course, being, give researchers an easy way to do the right thing. We want people to be able to do good science, and we want them to do that easy. We don't want to, add burden to that. We want it cheap, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing, though, was using the platform as a professional home. And this is what I'm going to get into next a little bit. What we realized was that myself, Nathaniel Gonzalez, and then the two guys that I mentioned from Medical College of Wisconsin, they eventually we realized they're not the only ones, or we're not the only ones. And there's a group of us at institution, just about every institution that wake up in the morning and think about this. And there's not always sort of a professional home for those individuals. And so one of the cool things that I think is sort of spun out of REDCap is we've designed it and we've tried very hard to make it a professional home for individuals in this field of clinical research informatics, particularly around data capture and management. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go. So fast forwarding a little bit, eventually around 2009, I think we published on the methodology. I'll let you in on a little secret. This paper is very highly cited now, I'm happy to say, but it was rejected, I think, 3 times by the journal associated with the American Medical Informatics Association. And again, that sort of ties back to we needed a professional home, because it was good work. It just wasn't appreciated at the time, as it was too applied maybe for that particular profession. Since then, that's changed a lot with AMIA, but at the time, we really had a hard time even getting this published. We did eventually get it published, and I think at the time we had 12 or 24 different institutions that were part of it. So we kind of fast tracked a bit. The publication is, it's a good one, but again, the secret is it took me so long to get it published, and the publishing cycle is so long that and REDCap was evolving so quickly that it was almost outdated from a methodology paper, as it went to press. So it was a lot better than even what was in the paper, but the paper has served a nice purpose in that it allows us to sort of have a marker paper, if you will, so that I don't know what everybody at Indiana is doing with REDCap, but I can sort of look at PubMed and see who's citing that paper, and there's generally a good chance that if you're citing it, you're using REDCap, and that helps us a lot from the consortium perspective. A little bit later, we published this paper, which was I think 2019. We published this paper, around sort of what it took to create and feed and nurture and grow the consortium itself. This paper actually maybe sets a record for me, at least, in publications that took the longest to write. I remember starting this paper on a plane ride back from the Mayo Clinic, and about 10 years later, we published the paper. It was ridiculous, but part of it was about every time I would get interested in it, we'd realize, okay, that everything's changed, and we've kind of had to morph because what worked for 5 institutions didn't work for 50 institutions, et cetera. And so this paper was published around the time we had about 3,000 partners, 3,000, 3,500 partners maybe. And you can kind of see the different ways that it sort of breaks out the phases. And if you're interested in growing a consortium, or if you're interested in that type of dissemination work, it's one model. And I always tell people your mileage may vary, but it does represent a good picture of the story of REDCap and sort of how to go from one institution to many institutions. This is my favorite figure in all of REDCap, and it was in that paper. So I always like to highlight it because I think it really shows the value of the way we've set up the consortium and the way that everybody works together for good. I'll start with the blue. The blue side of the infinity diagram on the top. We at Vanderbilt still build, test, and disseminate features every month that go into REDCap, and we deploy those out first at Vanderbilt, so that if anybody's going to get mad that something breaks, they're mad at me, not your folks mad at me. And so we do some testing at Vanderbilt, but very quickly we sort of roll it out to the consortium. The consortium is made up of administrators, usually 2 to 3 to 5 administrators at each of those dots on the map. And they deploy it out for their local research partners. We support the training and awareness around that. It's eventually used by the research community, who say things like, "This is great, but it would be really great if it did X, Y, and Z." We can't listen to every one of those researchers, but again, that's where the consortium comes in. We can listen to those administrators. And so, if we get a lot of comments around X, Y, and Z, that makes it into sort of a prioritization queue. I can't promise because we still have to pay for REDCap, but it's not really free, even though we give it away to academics, nonprofit, and government organizations. So I can't always sort of bend and meet every particular need. I have to also sort of pair that with what I can get funding to do. But whatever sort of makes it through that cycle, that again gets prioritized. We learn from the community, and that's actually what makes REDCap better. And that's been the case from the very beginning. Every one of those first 20 interviews that I did with researchers, that same concept came up. This is great, but will it do X? And sometimes I was able to say, yeah, give me about 3 minutes and I'll be there because I know this spiel by heart. Sometimes I would say, no, but that's not a bad idea. I've heard it before. And I might sort of think about putting that in. And sometimes they're just dumb ideas and you have to just say, yeah, that's interesting. Thanks. But this is how the consortium works, how the consortium and in particular the marriage between the consortium and the developers work. This slide you've already seen in a little different format. But again, we provide the software at no cost to academics, nonprofit, and government organizations. And we've been very, very pleased to see the uptake and the penetration across what seems to be, we had the same cycle in domestic as well as international. First, the academic institutions sign on, then the nonprofits sign on, and then the government organizations sign on. So we've seen that cycle repeat itself. So now I'll go into what's new after I check the time. I think I'm good. So what's new? We had a great year last year. 2004, I think, was one of the best productivity years we've had in probably a decade. And I'm not going to speak in detail about all of these, but I will kind of take you through the timeline from left to right. We set up with a lot of help from the consortium and some real dedicated resources from Vanderbilt as well through the program grant called the Trial Innovation Network. We set up what we call a rapid validation framework. So being able to sort of stand up a REDCap installation and use it to support the very rigorous requirements of FDA trials. There's a validation guideline called 21 CFR Part 11. What we found was within the REDCap consortium, we had some people sort of going through with that validation process. Sometimes they would go through with the process and they'd be many versions behind in REDCap because it's sort of a process that once you've validated a system, particularly to this rigor, there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of testing involved, and you don't want to do it again for a while. And so we had people sort of on older versions of REDCap, which always worried me because of the security pieces of that. There's patches and so forth that come out. But it's really hard. At Vanderbilt, we didn't have a 21 CFR Part 11 installation just because we knew it was going to, we knew about this issue. So to make a long story, and it was a long story, really short. We did create a methodology. We created a documentation framework. We created an automated test script framework, and again, we got the consortium itself behind this. And I'm proud to say that we've got a really, really nice model now for what we call rapid 21 CFR Part 11 validation. I think just for scoping, it took us, when we did the first one of these after starting to really focus on it as a group, it took maybe 6 weeks to validate a system. The last one or the next one was like a week and a half, and I think we're nearing down on even days now. And again, that's a big deal if you need it. It's not that big a deal if you don't need it, but it was a big deal to us. Another thing that we really invested heavily in last year was MyCap, this sort of sister application to REDCap designed around supporting studies and trials where you want to have sort of a long-term engagement and relationship with your participants. You can do short-term stuff. You can do really anything you want with the REDCap and SMS messages and surveys. You can sort of create lots of different features and functions for longitudinal studies, but particularly ones where we want really a deep engagement with research participants. And we want to make sure that that works regardless of whether you've got internet scarcity or not. We created this platform called MyCap, and I know there's some talks later on today, so I won't belabor the point here other than to say we had a lot more features and functionality last year and sort of merged it in with the the main code base of REDCap, which has really helped with uptake. Keep continuing along there, we did REDCap e-consent, what we call e-consent 2.0. Right before COVID, we were really lucky with this one. Right before COVID, we had done a lot of work around e-consent, and we deployed it right before COVID. You know, by and large, it was a, yeah, that's good type of moment when we got it deployed until COVID hit. And then then it was, hey, we need that and we need it fast. And we not only need it for research projects, but also for operational projects, et cetera. So we learned a lot of lessons in the I think 6 million of those, you know, in between 2019 or 20 and 2025. But we learned a lot of lessons. There was a lot of those, hey, this is great, but it would be even greater if type of moments after deployment. And so we took all of those lessons and created eConsent 2.0 earlier this year. The next to last one is REDCap Advanced Randomization. This was a cool one because you know, we've had randomization in REDCap for a long time. But it did relatively simple randomization. You know, you could sort of load in a table, define your stratification variables, and you know, it was serviceable, and a lot of people used it. But with platform trials coming on, more adaptive design trials coming on, especially the ones like we saw in COVID, you know, we realized, you know, we can add more sophistication here, and so this is a great consortium story. We had one of our best collaborators, Luke Stevens in Australia, did a lot of programming for that. We put a lot of support around it with domain experts through a trial innovation network where I was getting the funding. And around early fall of last year, we dropped in this advanced randomization framework within REDCap. And then finally, we almost got this in 2004. We did all the work. We just couldn't quite get all of the cybersecurity permissions in place. So it took us until early, maybe January of 2025. But we released our first AI or generative AI module into REDCap that does some pretty cool stuff now. But I'm really excited about the future, and I'll talk about that in a what's next slide in a moment. That I wasn't expecting. Probably because I'm pushing the wrong button. I love this quote. So as I was transitioning over to the what's new, it reminded me of this quote that, you know, it's good to count the dots on the map. It's good to talk about what we did in 2004, but really the most interesting part is you know, what we're going to do next. So what's next? You know, we spent a lot of time brainstorming this around the end of the year and the early part of the year. And as I'll tell you in a minute, we're doing some brainstorming right now. But at the beginning of the year, you know, I really wanted to sort of lean into decentralized trials. And again, part of that's because I'm really interested in decentralized trials. Part of it is I've got some funding that can help support development around decentralized trials. But I think I love it from an inclusivity standpoint, and I think there's some interesting work to be done there. We've been thinking about REDCap training and maybe centralizing that. We've been working on a pilot project at Vanderbilt for a good while, for like 2 years, around using REDCap, pairing REDCap with a participant compensation platform called Tango for gift card distribution. We're really leaning into more data connectivity from electronic health records like Epic and Cerner. We've created and deployed and evolved a platform called CDIS that's meant to sort of collect data from directly from the EHR once coordinators put in a medical record number and the study's approved, et cetera. But we're also thinking about this crazy idea around participant-mediated EHR. For a participant, we know you're a participant, a patient at Vanderbilt University in your Indiana study. You could say, hey, if you want Vanderbilt to share data for this research project, you know, here's a process to make that happen. It looks technically feasible and very, very, very powerful. And so that's, again, one of those things that we're really leaning into right now and to see if we can do it. A lot more AI and a lot more MyCap. But then this happened. This was from I think last week when I was sort of finishing these slides, and so we're seeing more and more uncertainty out there at institutions on what is the research funding going to look like, both in the case of grants, but also yeah, indirect rates, which affect, institutional investment in resources, et cetera. So one of the things that we've been, I've been sort of forced to do is sort of take a step back and think about that. This is sort of in the area of I needed to do it anyway. But the current sort of discussions at at the federal level on what the NIH is going to look like and how much funding is going to be available for research is really sort of forcing me to think about it in a different way, in a little more urgent way, which is not a bad thing. That's where innovation comes from. So really trying to figure out ways that we can sort of maintain the model that we've created where we can provide at no cost, REDCap for every academic, nonprofit and government organization that wants it, but also try to figure out some ways to not be so reliant on grants to be able to fund the work. So none of this is set in stone, but it's just some things that we've been thinking about. One, I mentioned earlier, this centralized training with certification. We've got some efforts going on there, and with the idea that perhaps other institutions may want to pay a certain rate to be able to sort of have sort of an all-you-can-eat training training modules with certification so that you could put it on your resume, or you put it in your 21 CFR Part 11 training requirements and so forth. So that's something that we've got a team kind of looking at right now. I think we'll launch this out to a small group at the NIH itself, this intramural group that we support there, as well as Vanderbilt. And if it goes well, then we may open it up to the consortium. Maybe thinking more about freemium features. Some of the I would never want to do this for incremental type of features and functions, but things like that participant mediated EHR. I know because we sort of live through trying to get people used to the concept of getting your EHR data married up with REDCap. There's a lot of non-technical work that goes into that. And so maybe when we think about some of those big features that are sort of quantum leaps, maybe we'll start thinking about a freemium type model. I don't even know what that looks like now, but it's sort of on the front burner given given what we're seeing. Integrations, I mentioned that Tango product, and we've been working with the Promise team from Northwestern for several years. We've got models where perhaps we can create incentives for other companies to sort of integrate in with REDCap, with the idea that you need to provide it at no cost or low cost for the researchers, but if you do, then we might be able to sort of take some sort of cut of that to fund non-discretionary programming, et cetera, for the platform itself. And then finally, just going down into the really small stuff. I got this really cool pair of socks with REDCap on them, as does Dan. So we're actually going to set up like a 1 month swag store at Vanderbilt and just see if people buy socks and coffee mugs and that sort of thing. And if that works, we'll disseminate it out. So we're thinking big stuff. We're thinking little stuff. We're thinking, not doing. But as I sort of wanted to present, what's new. These are some of the things that we're sort of wrestling with right now. And again, if you've got ideas, I'm available right after this session and all day. But one thing that I'm really, really passionate about is that AI piece. Thank you. We spent a lot of time, creating what we call a minimum viable product for being able to sort of plug in ChatGPT or Gemini into your REDCap installation. And if you do, then there are some features and functions that you can turn on with that. I'll let you in on a little secret. They're not terribly exciting in and of themselves, but we knew it was kind of going to be one of those, like the CDIS or the EHR piece. We knew there was going to need to be some work at the institution level by REDCap administrators to get this working, to get it okay. You kind of need a walled garden installation, so there's no information leakage, et cetera. So we knew that was going to take some work. So we put out this MVP with the idea that while you're working on getting this set up at your institution, we'll go ahead and start creating 2.0. We had a meeting last week with sort of a coalition of the willing within the REDCap consortium. There were about 20 folks there, I would say, and really work through a number of different what would be really cool type exercises. We came up with a bunch of those. The two that are my favorite are in the middle there. Being able to sort of maybe use REDCap to create a chatbot or an agent. You could imagine putting a consent form in there and a protocol and maybe publications around this project, and maybe that's something that could be in the workflow or the pathway of a potential participant for a study. Or you could add the manual operations, and maybe that would be some agent that might be useful for coordinating, training coordinators, et cetera. So I always try to think of those are two very, very simple use cases. But the more we've thought about, that sort of general framework of being able to sort of train these models with extra documentation that are specific to a study or trial, you get into some really interesting concepts that are generalizable. So I like that one for that reason. The other one that I really like, we're calling derivative field for now. And that would be, you have a new REDCap field type, or you set this up using action tags or some other way. But basically it is, when a certain event happens, I want you to take information from this other field or fields, and I want you to exercise this prompt, and I want the result to go here. So you can imagine there, if you sort of pair that with CDIS and clinical notes, that might be medical concept extraction or medications. If it's just sort of any text, maybe it's qualitative, some sort of qualitative assessment or de-identification. Again, I like this one because the use cases just kind of start boiling as you think about, what could we use that common infrastructure for? And then there was a bunch more stuff there, but those are the two that I think bubbled to the top, and the ones that we're actively pursuing, especially the first one I mentioned. Okay, and then finally, what matters? And I think I've got 7 minutes to tell you what matters, which should be plenty of time. So, again, I love showing this map. I love that infinity diagram. I love everything that I've talked about so far, but I often have to remind myself that what matters isn't Paul's bingo card on how many countries are using REDCap, but what really matters is the science. Because if the science isn't happening, then basically we're all just collaborating for collaboration's sake. So so first and foremost, it is that sort of along those lines, going back to that infinity diagram. I had a mentor tell me one time in very simple words, these words: used systems get better. So, again, I think we've proven that over and over again over the last 20 years as we've sort of run that infinity diagram and created new features and functions. Not all ideas are great, not all implementations are great, but we try to figure out a way to prioritize the ones that matter the most. And again, there's no way we could come up with some of the use cases that we've developed and disseminated without a lot of input from the larger community. So this is got a couple of recipe slides here. So as I was sort of thinking about the why this matters for researchers, it is, of course, making it easy to use, making it easy for them to do their job, and allowing them to sort of reduce the barriers for use, at least at Vanderbilt, no cost for any purpose. But what we found is that's where really innovation starts. I have seen so many cool use cases just in my Vanderbilt community, but especially across the consortium, that I would have never thought about using REDCap for this or that. But making it really easy and accessible, and then giving it to really smart people, that just sort of happens naturally. And then I think, again, one of the things that's really cool about REDCap is it plays well with REDCap. So if you leave your institution, or if you have a collaborator at another institution and you want to do the same type of project, or hey, let's take it out of the institutions. A few years ago when we had a Ebola crisis and then a measles crisis, we started seeing our public health working teams doing the same thing. And so we said, hey, you're all doing the same thing, and you're doing it in REDCap. Why don't you guys just get together and we can sort of help with a little bit of socialization energy to help with that. But the great thing is, you create one model for one institution or public health group, you can share it really, really easy with others. And so I think it's been a really nice platform for collaboration across teams that do similar work. The science piece, again, I go back there, and I really like to think that some of the projects that are going on in REDCap, it would be hard to do otherwise. And so in terms of what makes me skip to work, it's a lot of that. I really want to make sure that we're doing good in the world. I have one good example here. This one came from got to get these buttons. There we go. One good example here. I was actually making these slides for another talk in the fall, and came across this New England Journal one, and I remembered, hey, this person actually just emailed me last week, or maybe I'd already put this in. Let's say 5 or 1. 5, thanks. So it was interesting because this person had just emailed me, and she'd come to Vanderbilt, and she was telling me about this really cool study where they were giving people that were visibly and noticeably sort of comatose, and they were giving them mental tasks verbally, and then they were sticking them in an MRI machine and sort of watching what happens in the brain. And what they found was about 25% of those that showed no sign of activity, externally, they were actually doing something in their brains with these tasks, which to me is just incredible and amazing. And I'm not going to go into it any further because it's a REDCap talk. But this individual emailed me and said, hey, I did this study. I want to meet you soon because I'm at Vanderbilt now, and I just did this study at Mount Sinai. And I said, yeah, heck yeah, I'll meet you. Yeah, I've been reading about your project already, but the more I started thinking about this particular project by Dr. Bowden, as you see here, the more I realized, that you didn't learn all of this at Vanderbilt. You came from Mass General originally, and so somebody from Mass General actually taught you REDCap and set this thing up for you, and this probably you. So thanks for that. But she also did the. I'm going to skip this, but she also did the study. It's part of a multi-center study, and she did the study at Icahn Medical School of Medicine in Mount Sinai. So again, good for those guys. And I think again, it's not it is the REDCap platform. So that's part of the success story. But a bigger part of the success story is all of these experts, at different institutions that know how to set it up and run. And there are many here in this audience today. So I love that from a story of, not only the platform, but also the consortium, and especially the consortium doing good in the world. So again, I'm going to go back to my common goals, give researchers teams an easy way to do the right thing for their data management needs, and also that professional home. I'm going to learn how to punch these buttons. All right, so for this talk, I thought, I love this quote by Fred Rogers that by his mom, things were going tough, so she told him, just when things are going tough, just look for the helpers, and you'll find them. And again, as I think about the REDCap consortium and events like this and organizations like this, I just can't help but think about this particular quote. So the REDCap consortium is huge now. It's got a lot of individuals from around the world, but these are some of the MVPs, and there are 2 in this audience. So Andy Aronson from Indiana University received our coveted REDCap consortium MVP award a few years ago. And then Dan Foley, who's speaking today, is also in that prestigious club. Notice I'm not in that prestigious club, but I'm hoping to get in that club one year. Gummit. I'm really a lot better at informatics than I am pushing buttons. So I asked the consortium, hey, can you just give me a couple of examples? Some of you, I'm giving this talk. Can you give me a few examples that sort of embody that spirit? I love this one by Catherine Bauer Martinez, who used to be here, I know, but is now at Mount Sinai. She said that when she joined that community, one thing she realized was that it was different, and that somebody told her, yeah, it's always been that way. And then she really went out of her way to thank and acknowledge those in the consortium that have contributed to her professional growth. And then this one is by Yelena Frigent from Sydney. And I love this, around the REDCap consortium. This is the space which remind us that science and kindness and collaboration matter in combination, create enormous positive change in the world. And again, this has been one of my catchphrases forever. I told my kids, when they were growing up, when you pick a profession, there's 3 or 4 things that I want you to look at. But one of them, really, if you could figure out a way to make sure that you're doing good in the world, then you'll always love it. You'll always skip to work. So I'm going to end with this. This was our last gathering down in North American gathering down in St. Petersburg, Florida last year. Also, I want to remind that there are many of these regional ones now going across the country, which are really cool as well. And I wanted to sort of break apart that picture at my house and sort of thank individually the folks that are in my team that are big time contributors and responsible for REDCap. And I want to especially acknowledge the guy on the left there with his face in the zero. That's Rob Taylor, our lead developer and REDCap extraordinaire. And then the lady with her face in the zero. I made everybody get their picture with me, by the way, with these balloons with their face in the zero. But that's Brenda Miner, and I would say that she is sort of the de facto lead of the consortium and all things training. She and her group. So thanks for letting me attend, and looking forward to the rest of the day.